This girl grew up next to gorillas who were then released back into the jungle. 12 years later, she decides to search for them, and then something unbelievable happens. "We have to turn back. There's nothing to see here," Ten's father shouted to his daughter, who was walking quickly into the deep forest. But Tani had reached the point where she really didn't care what anyone had to say. Her father had been trying to talk her out of taking this trip ever since she decided to take it, but she was adamant about going through with it. The guide, who was walking alongside her, also tried to make her stop and turn back. This was her first time in the jungle, and he warned her that it had changed drastically over the last couple of years. A troop of gorillas lived close to the heart of the jungle and had evolved under the leadership of a new, more aggressive leader. This leader employed violent methods to protect his family from hunters and poachers who frequently came to the forest. He made no distinction between humans, attacking almost anyone who entered their territory and ignoring the warning calls. Still, the apprehension and doubts from both her father and the guide weren't enough to stop her from going through with her plan. After months of tracking, Tani and her father finally learned that one of the gorillas in the troop was Jalta, a special friend that Tani had spent some of her best years with. He had been sent away when she was still very young. However, she never forgot about him, and she had been slowly counting down the days until she could find him again. That was why she was here. Despite all the warnings she received, she wanted nothing more than to see the animal that doted on her long before she knew how to say her name. As she dwelled on the doubts from both her father and the guide, Tani noticed something run swiftly through the trees. But from where she was standing, she wasn't certain exactly what it was. The guide had seen it too and immediately asked everyone to remain alert for what was about to come. Soon, a roar echoed through the forest. This was the first warning sign that the group had no business being there and needed to leave immediately. Tani and her group stopped in their tracks, and her father, Damien Aspinall, made his way to the front of the line to stand by her side. Shadowy figures began surrounding them, hidden by the trees, as another roar reverberated through the forest, causing her and her father to take several steps back. This was another warning, and if they didn't leave, the gorillas were going to attack. Well aware of the danger they were in, the guide ignored Tani's wishes and asked the group to finally turn back. Her noble intentions weren't enough to put the lives of everyone else at risk. Damien placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder, and Tani responded, realizing that this was as far as they were going to get. As she turned to walk away, another piercing roar immediately stopped Tani in her tracks. She had spent enough time with animals, both as a child and as an adult, to know what this particular sound meant. The gorillas were irritated by their presence and were not about to let them leave easily. Tani turned around and was immediately struck by the sight before her. The huge gorillas had emerged from the trees, surrounding their group with a menacing presence. One of them, larger and more imposing than the rest, stood at the forefront, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Fear gripped her. She had never been in such a perilous situation before. Then, with a low, menacing growl, the gorilla bared his teeth, a clear warning that she was intruding on dangerous ground. The ferocity in his gaze made her heart race, but as she looked closer, something familiar caught her eye, a patch of distinctive brown hair on his head. It was Jalta, her gentle companion from childhood. But this was not the gentle Jalta she remembered from her childhood. This was a powerful leader, hardened by years in the wild. Yet, as she stared at the patch of distinctive brown hair on his head, she couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the fierceness, her old friend was still there. Encouraged by this discovery and her desperation to reach him, Tani was about to do something unexpected. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "Tani, stay perfectly still," Damien urged, his tone filled with both fear and concern. "It's been 12 years, honey. He might not recognize you, and his time in the wild has made him unpredictable. Please don't make any sudden moves." But Tani couldn't let go of the bond they once shared. Memories flooded her mind. Jalta catching her when she stumbled, his protective arms around her as a child, the way he had always looked at her with trust and affection. She couldn't believe that all of that was gone. "Dad, it's Jalta," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just know it's him, and I know he remembers me." Yet doubt gnawed at her. What if she was wrong? What if Jalta saw her as just another human intruder? The risk was immense. One wrong move, and her life could be over. But the thought of turning back, of leaving without knowing if he still remembered her, was unbearable. She hadn't come this far to just walk away. Tanny Aspinall spent her childhood at Howlett's Wild Animal Park in England, where her father, renowned conservationist Damien Aspinall, nurtured her love for animals. From infancy, she was introduced to the park's wildlife, and by her first birthday, she met the gorillas Jalta and Bims. Despite initial uncertainty, the gorillas quickly bonded with Tanny, treating her with affection and protectiveness. As she grew up, they were her first and best friends, and their relationship flourished over the years. When Tanny turned 12, her father sent her to live with her aunt to attend school, partly to broaden her education and partly because Jalta and Bims were being rehomed to their natural habitat. Knowing how much Tanny loved the gorillas, Damien made the decision without informing her, fearing her reaction. After rehoming them, Damien closely monitored their progress, pleased to see them thriving in the wild. Though Tanny understood why her father relocated the gorillas, she struggled with the loss. She suggested visiting them, but Damien refused, believing they needed more time to adjust. Years later, after graduating and working alongside her father, Tanny never forgot Jalta and Bims. She eventually saved enough money and found a guide to help her find them. Although Damien was initially hesitant, he ultimately supported her desire to reunite with the gorillas. Little did they know, this trip would result in a face-off with a full-grown, angry gorilla. Driven by a deep, unshakable connection, Tanny made her decision. Ignoring the rising panic in her chest and the warnings from both her father and the guide, she took a step forward. Jalta, she called softly, her voice carrying a mix of hope and desperation. For a tense moment, Jalta didn't move. His fierce eyes bore into hers, and Tanny felt the weight of the years that had passed between them. She hesitated, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But then, in a gesture that had once been their secret language, she bared her teeth and growled softly, mirroring the playful exchanges they used to share. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Tanny's heart raced as she waited, the seconds stretching into eternity. Tanny called out to Jalta as she took another step forward. She was certain that he remembered who she was, yet he made no attempt to approach her. His time living in the forest had made him distrust humans, and Tanny was just like any other human he had come across before. Seeing that he wasn't attacking her, Tanny continued to inch closer. She put her hands in the air to show that she didn't mean to hurt them, and she kept talking to the gorilla. The other gorillas that surrounded the group started to back down when they noticed Jalta didn't show any hostility towards the humans. Finally, Tanny was standing right in front of the gorilla, still looking at him. And then, slowly, Jalta's growl softened. The fierce look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something she hadn't seen in years: recognition. The bond they had once shared broke through the years of separation, and the wildness of the jungle seemed to melt away. Tanny's eyes filled with tears as she realized that Jalta remembered her. He wasn't just a wild gorilla, he was the friend who had once protected and loved her. Encouraged, she stepped closer, placing her hands gently on his powerful arms. "It's me, Jalta," she whispered, a smile breaking through her fear. Tanny then placed her arms carefully on his and smiled brightly at him. Jalta responded with a low, familiar growl, as if confirming their bond. Tanny's heart swelled with emotion, and without thinking, she wrapped her arms around the huge gorilla in a hug. It was a bold, risky move, but in that moment she knew it was right. Damien watched in awe, his fear slowly giving way to relief. He soon approached and stopped every time he took a few steps after witnessing the touching scene. When Jalta did not react aggressively, Damien slowly hugged him, and the gorilla reciprocated by wrapping his arms around the man. This was the moment Tanny had been waiting for, minus 12 years of longing, fear, and hope culminating in this one powerful reunion. As Tanny held Jalta, she felt the years melt away. He was still gentle with her, as he had always been. But before she could fully absorb the moment, another gorilla emerged. It was Bims, with his young son at his side. But Bims was different now. The years had changed him too. His gaze was steady, his posture protective as he approached, and beside him, clinging to his leg, was a young gorilla, his son. The sight made Tanny's breath catch in her throat. This was a new chapter, a new generation unfolding before her eyes. Bims moved with careful deliberation, his eyes never leaving Tanny. There was a deep sense of responsibility in his demeanor, a fatherly protectiveness that mirrored the way he had once looked out for her. But now, it was his own child he was guarding. Taney felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she realized that Bims was introducing her to his family, an acknowledgement of the bond they once shared. The young gorilla, curious but cautious, peeked out from behind Bim's leg, his large eyes studying Taney with interest. She knelt down slowly, making herself small and non-threatening, extending her hand gently towards him. "Hello there," she whispered, her voice soft and welcoming. The young gorilla hesitated, then, encouraged by his father's calm presence, took a tentative step forward. Taney's heart melted as the little one reached out his tiny hand, grasping her fingers with surprising strength. It was a moment of pure connection, a bridge between the past and the present. She couldn't help but smile, tears of joy welling up in her eyes. This was Bim's legacy, a continuation of the bond she had once shared with these incredible animals. Bims watched intently, his protective instincts on high alert, but he trusted Taney. She could see it in the way he allowed his son to interact with her. The young gorilla's playful curiosity reminded her so much of how Bims had been when they were both younger, full of life and eager to explore the world. The continuity of life, the passing of time, and the evolution of their relationships all culminated in this simple, tender moment. As the young gorilla grew bolder, he started to tug at Taney's hair, mimicking the playful gestures his father used to make. Taney laughed softly, her heart light with happiness. She realized that while the years had changed them all, the essence of their bond remained unbroken. This was her family, and they had accepted her back into their world, not just as a memory, but as someone who still belonged. Bims, seeing the joy in his son and the warmth in Taney's eyes, relaxed his stance. He stepped closer, placing a large, reassuring hand on her shoulder, as if to say, "You are still one of us." The significance of the moment wasn't lost on Taney. She was no longer the little girl who played with gorillas in a park, but she was still connected to them in a way that transcended time and distance. The gorillas ate the snacks that Taney brought along with her, and she played with Bim's son. But as the sun set, it was time to say goodbye. Jalta and Bims walked with them until the group left their territory before returning home. Taney isn't certain that she will ever see them again. However, nothing would change how important they are to her. She planned to continue working with her father to ensure that they remained safe in their environment as they expanded their families.